The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2432. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 2432, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to state government, providing for judiciary, public safety, corrections, and government data practices policy, the second engrossment.
There are amendments at the desk. If there's no objection, we'll let the author explain the bill, and then we'll act on the amendments. I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 2432 is a good bill that has been worked out given the constraints of the situations that we are currently in public safety. We have some good amendments that have been included in this bill, and we worked out what we did in the situation that we had. We have added some language that will make Minnesota safer, as we think it should, and I'd just like to refer now to Co-Chair Moeller for her to describe her plans of the bill, but appreciate your support.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I forget, I do want to thank all of the staff who worked with us on the Public Safety Committee. We have Ellen McDaniel. She is the DFL Committee Administrator. Christian Lawrence, the DFL CLA. Zach Meinertz, the DFL Researcher. John Holtquist, the GOP Committee Administrator. Mary McNamara, the GOP CLA. Isaac Pylon, the GOP Researcher. Our nonpartisan staff, Ben Johnson, Jeff Diebel, John Waltz, and our pages, Sierra and Joe. Also want to thank my co-chair, Paul Novotny. It has been an honor working together with you and with all of the members on the committee. This is a topic that can get very contentious at times, but I think we had really great discussions in our committee, and I think people felt heard, and it was a valuable experience. I do want to highlight just a couple of provisions, things in the bill. The first one is related to funding for victim services. And I see Chair Rarick over there maybe helping pass out letters, I'm not sure. But victim services are really important in our state. They are the services that are provided to domestic violence victims, like domestic violence shelters. We have sexual assault advocates. Mr. Chair, I'm having trouble hearing. Do you mind? Thank you. Thank you so much. They are important for sexual assault survivors, having advocates. Child abuse centers are funded through victim services funding, and general crime. And they are really at a very critical point right now. Federal funding is the bulk of their funding, and it has been uncertain for years, and it is really even at more of a crisis right now. And so I'm really glad in this bill that we could recognize the importance of that and put what dollars we were able to towards that. In addition, working with Chair Rarick and coming up with some creative solutions around funding victim services. I was also glad that we're able to fund important law enforcement training and recruitment efforts with this bill. But I do want to note, as Chair Novotny noted, the constraints we had. We were given a target of $50 million in each biennium, and while that looked good on paper compared to some of the other committees, I will note that it doesn't even come close covering the operating adjustments for our agencies. For the BCA, for example, that means being able to process evidence. It means investigators who are helping investigate violent crimes. For the Department of Corrections, it means being able to pay our corrections officers, which thankfully now are, I believe, very close to full capacity when they were struggling to recruit before. And that means keeping lights on, not only to be able to pay them, but also to provide the rehabilitative services that people who are incarcerated need so that they would become members in the community again. They don't recidivate, and they have the supports that they need to be productive members of society. So it is still very much a concern for us that even if we put that full $50 million towards the operating adjustment, we still wouldn't have even come close to meeting that operating adjustment. So I do hope more work can be done on this bill in conference committee, but it is a good bill now, and I am looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Myself and Chair Liebling were the co-chairs of the Judiciary and Civil Law Committee, and we have a pretty basic bill here. I want to first start by thanking all of our staff, partisan and nonpartisan, and the pages. Everyone was just a great team to work with this year. I want to thank our members who just, I feel like we did a lot of good vetting in our committee, a lot of good committee work on both sides of the aisle. And what our bill does is we, from a finance perspective, we really tried to hold people's paychecks harmless. The cost of health insurance has been skyrocketing this year. And so what a lot of the one-time funding that we had went to hold those paychecks harmless for judiciary employees. We also ask each of our accounts what they were spending, what additional costs they were going to have for leases. So we're trying to be really practical in our approach to the budget. The one small thing outside of that, perhaps, was the Guardian Ad Litem program. A few years ago, that volunteer program was done away with. There are over 170 kids waiting for guardians ad litem, and so they are reinstituting that program, and they needed a couple of FTE units to train those new volunteers. So there's a small spending item for that that will really help our kids. Other policy items, the Met Council kind of had a self-policing bill that they brought to us with data practices that would improve transparency there. Representative Green, a freshman over there, dipped her toe in the data practices realm this year and came up with a really good bill regarding data practices requests. Representative West had a bill related to leftover funding in foreclosure actions, and the sheriff's departments who run those county by county foreclosures were left holding, a few $100s, $1,000, and not knowing what to do with it, so his bill addressed that. There were some technical changes to the forensic navigator responsibilities, and that's kind of a broad overview of what our bill does. And with that, I would love to turn it over to my co-chair, Chair Liebling.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And I agree with my co-chair, Representative Scott. This is kind of a basic bill. Our budget was extremely thin, and we did the best we could to try to provide for the employees. I really appreciate that working with Chair Scott. I think we have a lot of agreement around the things that we needed to do in our bill. And I do appreciate that she shares my concern for the judiciary and really the concern about how important it is to have an independent third branch of government and the work that they do. And I think that we here in Minnesota are very respectful of our judiciary. And I think that we get a lot of that respect back from our judiciary, and that is a really good and a healthy relationship, and one that is really worth keeping strong. So I won't add much more. I think Chair Scott did a really good job introducing the bill. We did work hard to vet bills that came to us. A lot of the work of the committee is pretty nitty-gritty work that doesn't make big headlines. Sometimes it does. But often it's just making sure that the things that we pass really do what they're supposed to do and that we understand what they are. And she's been a great partner in that. And I add my thanks to all of the staff and look forward to the debate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House File Number 2432, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A12.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Scott, who will explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this was agreed on by both sides of the aisle in our committee. This is an amendment that was carried by Representative Paul Anderson, and it has to do with transparency with small cities and any agreements or settlements that they might reach with an employee that might have been behaving badly in office and they had to reach a settlement with that person. Right now, they're exempt in law from having to share that with the taxpayers. The some of the finer aspects of that settlement, and so this just makes them subject as well to being transparent. And I urge members' support.
Is there any discussion on the amendment? I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Being no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. The amendment prevails. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend House Law number 2432, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A10.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment has bipartisan support, and we actually tried to do it quickly on the floor last year towards the end of session, but because we had missed deadlines because of when the incident happened, we, Chair Moeller and Chair Novotny, decided it would be better to wait and go through the process this year. Briefly, this came as a result of a excessive speed incident in my district where a constituent's grandmother, Sandy Wetterland, was killed because someone was driving through her neighborhood at 90 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone and killed her. And during that process, the constituent working with Department of Public Safety realized that there's a gap in statute. And what happens currently is if someone has probable cause to be having committed criminal vehicular operation or criminal vehicular homicide, because drugs, alcohol, or other intoxicating substances were involved, DPS is required to suspend their license and revoke it. But if it's just speed, that is not the case. So they came to me and said, look, we need to tighten this up because there is a lot of cases that just involve excessive speed that do not involve drugs and alcohol, and this is a gap in statute. So working closely with Chair Moeller and Chair Novotny, we went through all the hoops, we went through all the hearings this year. My constituent and his family came and testified many times at great heartache to them. And so I'm very pleased that we are able to offer this today in honor of Sandy Wetterland and her family, Matt Whalen, Mark Rowe, and Brittany Rowe, and I ask for your support, members.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Robbins, for bringing this bill. It really does close a loophole that's needed, and I am glad that we can incorporate it into our bill today, and I'm going to recommend a yes vote. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed, say nay. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Niska moves to amend House Law number 2432, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A11.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A11 amendment is patterned after House File 20, which we debated on the House floor at quite length a few weeks ago. And when we debated that bill, I asked each of us to reflect on the timeless words of Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, his call to preserve a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That kind of democracy requires sunlight, and as we are all aware, recently some of that sunlight reached the Attorney General's office. Recently released audio recordings reveal conversations that happened between the Attorney General and individuals who were later implicated and in some cases convicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal. In those recordings, the Attorney General—
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Masons 124, paragraph 1, in debate, members must confine remarks to questions before the body and avoid personalities. The debate here is not any individual. It is the policy and the amendment.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General was asked in those recordings to use his authority to protect businesses under investigation for wrongdoing, and rather than distance himself or remain neutral to allow the legal process to unfold, he responded in those recordings, "Of course, I'm here to help."
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, there was a point of order, and I didn't hear a ruling or any resolution of the point of order. Was there a resolution to it?
I'll remind the body that there was no ruling made by the Speaker as to the point of order that was just stated. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General in those recordings even urged the individuals, let's go fight these people. He was offered campaign contributions during that meeting, contributions that he later accepted. The release of those audio recordings raises questions about what's going on in the Attorney General's office that go directly to the need to pass the legislation that we had previously debated, House File 20. Although he has insisted that nothing came of the meeting, his office blocks disclosure of closed investigative
State your point
data.
of order.
Masons 124, we are continuing to talk about an individual, and we are not talking about the policy that is in the bill.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll go back to, I believe it was last year during debate, where Masons 124 Subdivision 2 was brought up on a number of occasions again and again and again, when we had the temerity to use the word or the name Mary Moriarty, and it was then Speaker Pro Tem that ultimately ruled that in Subdivision 2, a member, in referring to another member, should avoid using the member's name rather than identifying that member by district. The only protection in Masons 124 is for another member. And the Speaker Pro Tem at the time ruled that another person could be mentioned on the floor of the House without saying that they were being impugned because the debate was germane to them. So please don't try to rise under Masons 124 to try to obfuscate the content of the debate, because the previous, your own Speaker Pro Tem ruled that it was wholly appropriate to use then the name of Mary Moriarty, but also from you all today, where some of your members used the name of the President again and again and again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out that all those comments were directed to 124, paragraph 2. What I heard the point of order being raised under 124, paragraph 1, which references personalities, and I heard a lot of personality in that and not a lot of merits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was explaining before the Attorney General's former employee interrupted.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. In the back.
State your point of order.
Masons 124 personalities. Can we get a ruling on this, please? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I will refrain from that, but I'll remind the members to leave personalities out of the debate. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General's office has blocked disclosure of information that would go directly to the question of whether or not anything actually happened under the Energy Policy Advocates versus Ellison case, the exact case that the 811 amendment is aimed at fixing. Transparency isn't just an option, it's essential. It's the foundation of accountability, the safeguard of our democracy, and protects public trust, especially when serious questions like this arise. The A11 will help ensure that what happens behind closed doors in the Attorney General's office sees the light of day. We can protect people's privacy while shining a light on what the Attorney General's office is doing, who is influencing that office, whether it's those under a criminal investigation, nonprofits, corporations, or billionaires with political agendas, because Minnesotans have a right to know when their Attorney General's office is working with them. Minnesotans have a right to know whether the Attorney General is telling the truth, that nothing came of that meeting. That's why the A11 is so important. House File 20 is just sitting on the table. I hope we can take it off the table and pass it. It has been blocked twice on party line votes. We need to pass this bill for exactly the reason that members of the other side want to stop us from talking about this issue today. I hope we can fix this bill. I understand it's not going to be today. That's why I withdraw the A11 amendment.
Representative Niska has withdrawn the amendment. There is an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Reimer moves to amend House File number 2432. The second Grossman as amended. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Mr. Speaker and members, thank you for the opportunity to present this amendment. This amendment helps round out what I believe to be an otherwise good bill. It answers the question that was addressed in this last election, talking about the need for tighter immigration enforcement and illegal immigrants' crime. This amendment accomplishes two main things. The first is that it mandates any illegal immigrant arrested under suspicion of a violent crime as defined by Minnesota statute 611A.036, subdivision 7, even in cases where the county attorney elects not to prosecute, to be reported to federal immigration authorities. Second, this bill prevents state and local entities from actively prohibiting investigations from federal immigration authorities. I think this is an important bill because we've had an election that has spoken loudly on this issue in 2024. And secondly, in Congress, the model legislation is the Lake and Riley Act, which got broad bipartisan support. So I ask for your green vote today on A15. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Under Rule 3.21, motions and propositions and amendments must be germane. This amendment expands the scope, introduces a new subject, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
State your advice.
So, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing in the underlying bill on immigration enforcement whatsoever. In addition, the amendment introduces two new sections of law that are not in the underlying bill because they are brand new sections. So if our germaneness standard is that you get to make anything germane by inserting it into the section of law that we are debating, the chapter of law, then that is going to be opening our doors pretty wide. But most egregious of all, this has Chapter 388 in this amendment, which is not in the bill at all. That would require a major change to the title of the bill, which is one of the principal considerations in determining germaneness. And even under the GOP's own rules proposal from earlier this session, a new chapter being inserted into the bill is not germane. This is not a close call, Mr. Speaker, and I ask that you find the point of order well taken.
Further advice.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. This amendment is certainly germane to the Public Safety and Judiciary Bill. The Chapter 388, just in case anyone's curious, has the title County Attorneys. I think everyone would understand that Chapter 388, even though there's not a provision relating to Chapter 388 yet in the underlying bill, if we're going to talk about county attorneys, the only bill that would be germane to would be the Public Safety and Judiciary Omnibus Bill. Certainly it is the case that we create new penalties, new procedures relating to criminal justice in this bill. The A10 amendment did something very similar to this. It was obviously taken on a bipartisan vote. This bill does not substantially change or expand the scope or purpose of the bill. It doesn't require a major change in the amendment. It doesn't introduce an independent question. It's about public safety and the data practices that we are also dealing with in this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge that you find the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
The point of order should be well taken just because the bill, but because the amendment mentions county attorneys, that has nothing to do with this bill. Again, there is nothing about immigration enforcement in this bill. And it's also problematic that you just referenced the A10 that we took, the Robbins Amendment, which we took in good faith in an agreement. And so I really hope that we're not going to go down this line of when we negotiate in good faith, that you are going to use that against us when there is an amendment that is clearly not germane. Thank you.
Any further advice? Seeing no further advice, I'm prepared to rule. I have studied the amendment, I've reviewed the bill, I've considered all of your advice, and I'm ruling that the point of order is not well taken.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Speaker.
Representative Long appeals the ruling of the Speaker. The
And
15
request a roll call vote.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Let me remind the body that a green vote will support the ruling of the Speaker, and a red vote will be overturning the ruling of the Speaker. Any discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. The Chief Clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Say it again. Go ahead, Dave.
Baker.
Dave, go ahead.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and 67 nays, it is the judgment of the House that the ruling of the Speaker stands.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, under Supplemental Agreement Rule 13.3, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21, which I did, and the question is appealed, which I did, then the rule states the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. If you look at the board, it is 67-67. That means that there was no Democrat who voted to find the motion or proposition germane. This was a rule that we negotiated in good faith. I have a document here that is signed by Speaker Dameth, Speaker Emerita Hortman, myself, Republican Floor Leader Niska. The language here is plain, and it means that there needs to be a vote of a Democrat and a vote of a Republican to find the ruling of the Speaker is overturned. Otherwise, this is going to be found to not be germane. So I ask the Speaker to find my point of order well taken.
Further advice. Representative Niska.
Advice, Mr. Speaker. It's been the precedent of this House for over 150 years that the Speaker's ruling is not overturned on a tie vote. That was not the negotiation. That was not the intent of the agreement. Without speaking to the good faith of my colleague, I will say that the representations that were made in the discussion of this agreement were not consistent with his current statements, and that was not the intent of the agreement. It was not what was agreed to between the two parties, and I urge that you find the point of order not well taken.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, rules matter in this chamber. Rules take precedent over any prior actual precedent of the body. The rules are the principal function that governs this body. We all agreed to these rules. There was a bipartisan vote in favor of these rules. The language of the rule is plain. The language of the rule is that at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. I did not hear an argument that this language is to be interpreted any differently. This language is plain and clear on its face. This language is the rule that we have all adopted. I'm not going to reply to the remarks about good faith conversation. We had a very clear conversation. We have a very clear rule. Rules need to be enforced in this chamber. We are only as good as our word and our rules in this body.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
Advice.
Mr. Speaker, I direct your attention to the first paragraph of the supplemental agreement that again was signed by the leaders referenced by Leader Long. To the extent a conflict exists between the terms of this supplemental agreement and other applicable authority, there's no limitation there. The terms of this supplemental agreement prevail. Mr. Speaker, again, to the extent there is a conflict between the supplemental agreement that was signed by Leader Niska and the other leaders and other authority of any kind, the supplemental agreement prevails. Mr. Speaker, by the terms of the agreement that was signed by Republican leaders, by Democratic leaders, we have to look to the supplemental agreement, and that says this precisely what's listed under Rule 13.3. Mr. Speaker, this agreement compels you to find the point of order not well taken. If you don't, you're violating the agreement, and the terms of this supplemental agreement prevail. That's what was signed.
Any further advice? Seeing no further advice, I'm prepared to rule. I've studied the information at hand, listened to both sides, and I am determining that the point of order is not well taken.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal the ruling of the Speaker and ask for a roll call.
The Representative Long appeals the ruling of the Speaker. 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Any further discussion on the ruling of the Speaker? Representative Long.
Mr. Speaker, the rules of this body mean something to this body. There has been no argument that the rule here has any other interpretation than what was laid out today. At least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. If another member wants to get up and make an argument on this plain language about what that means, feel free. Go ahead. I'd love to hear it. I have not heard that argument because the language is plain. The rule is plain, and this overrules custom and usage. This overrules any previous rule that we have in this chamber because this was our agreement, which we passed. So I would ask the body to uphold the agreement that we all came to and that we passed together. Thank you.
Further advice?
Mr. Speaker, advice?
The representative from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So everybody else who's spoken so far has a law degree. I think, I don't know, does Representative Niska have a law degree? I'm not sure. But, okay, so I'm just a regular person, but I do have a skill that I didn't have to go to law school to gain, and that is the skill of reading comprehension. I am really deeply puzzled how there is any question about this. Any question at all. It is written in black and white. It is signed by our leaders. And I don't know about anybody else, but I think that when my leader steps up and signs something, they do it on behalf of me, of our caucus, and it means something. We are only as good as our word in here. We all know that. We all know that because this place is individual relationships. And when you break your word, when you read words on a piece of paper, put your name on it, sign it, and it means nothing, then what does any of this mean? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
We're no longer on advice, but I'll take your discussion. Representative from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This is fascinating, especially for those of us who were here last term, especially for those of us who were here on the last day of last year of last term, where all these rules that we're hearing all these sanctimonious speeches about today were thrown right out the window in order to put forward a 1,400-page omnibus bill that you could have brought up anything under the sun and it would have been germane because it covered literally everything, the whole spectrum, big giant sandwich of DFL priorities that were so beyond scrutiny that it wasn't even available to look at online at the time. Wasn't printed out. The folks who were here voted yes, not even knowing what was in it, couldn't possibly claim to know because it wasn't available to read. Now, I didn't plan on making this speech today, but if I'm going to sit here and listen to member after member after member on the other side pretend to have this sanctimonious regard for the rules and how much they matter and condescend to us about reading comprehension, it's not going to come from somebody who pushed green on that 1,400-page monstrosity last year.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Could you remind the body, are we in the 93rd session of the House or the 94th session of the House? Thank you.
Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the 94th session of the House learned from the 93rd session of the House is that whoever's sitting up on that dais makes the rules. We saw it time and time again, time and time again.
Members.
And we can go back and play the tape, and you know I'm right. Do not pretend that you're standing on some sort of righteous point over this argument over germaneness.
Point of order, Speaker.
The rules only matter.
State your point of order.
Masons 124, personalities not permitted in debate. This body is here today to debate bills so that we can pass budgets. I hope that you will find my point of order well taken so that we can move on to the business ahead of the House. Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder that personalities are not allowed in debate. Representative Hudson.
What about a good thing to remember when you question our ability to comprehend reading? When you talk down to us like we don't know how to read.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Again, under Mason's personalities are not permitted in debate. Please remind the body to stick to the business in front of the House.
I'll remind the body that personalities are not allowed in discussion. Please confine your remarks to the task at hand. Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trump, Musk, Trump, Musk, Trump, Musk. How many times have we heard that? No points of order over here about personalities, but you guys can't get your heads out of D.C. We know how this vote's going to go down, and we also know how votes went down last year, and it does matter because a lot of us are still here. You want to talk about relationships and the importance of maintaining them in good faith? Practice what you preach.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was really an incredible moment that just happened on this House floor. What I just heard from the other side was an idea that because we don't like what happened last year, now the rules are irrelevant. Whoever's up there gets to decide. That's a verbatim quote. You guys are upset that you think we didn't follow the rules, and your takeaway from that is now the rules don't apply to anybody. Is that really how we want to live in this chamber, that there are no rules? That's incredible. That was an incredible statement. I have to believe that my colleague didn't really mean that. I hope that isn't what was meant, but that's actually not why I stood up. I just want to pause for a minute and say, I think we should follow some rules in here and not just the rule of whoever is up in the chair gets to decide everything. I'm blown away by this. So when I look at the supplemental agreement, on line 1.2 it says, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21 and if the question is put to the body, or if a decision of the presiding officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. I heard Leader Niska say that that doesn't mean that someone from this side of the aisle has to vote in order for something to be found germane. I don't understand how the words on the page could mean that. I wonder if Leader Niska would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Niska.
You want? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for Leader Niska is, what does the words on line starting on line 1.21, extending to line 2.1, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane mean? What does that phrase mean?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Stevenson. The context of that sentence matters. It talks about appealing the ruling of the Speaker. It's talking about how the ruling of the Speaker can be overturned. That was the discussion that I had privately with Leader Long. I think he knows that this is not, that the interpretation he is forwarding today is not the interpretation of this rule that we discussed. It is not the purpose of this rule that we discussed, and that's why the point of order was well taken.
Representative Stevenson.
Mr. Speaker, will Leader Niska continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Niska. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so you say it wasn't the purpose and the intention. I'm asking about the plain language, but my question to you, what was the purpose or intention, if not that?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Stevenson. I believe Representative Long's specific words in describing the purpose of this amendment was to allow for rogue amendments, was the language that he used, to not be brought forward, not amendments that are favored by an entire Congress.
Representative Stevenson.
Well, and will the leader continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative Stevenson.
Okay, so what I'm understanding you to say is that this rule is only intended to apply if the two caucus leaderships don't like an amendment. Is that, am I understanding you correctly? If someone without the blessing of leadership brings an amendment, then this rule applies, but otherwise it doesn't apply. Is that what you're saying?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Stevenson. The words that Leader Long used to me were rogue amendments. And perhaps he has some other, that was how I interpreted his language and his purpose for doing this. But specifically in the context of the entire sentence, it talks about appealing the ruling of the Speaker. Our interpretation is that refers to how the ruling of the Speaker can be overturned. The ruling of the Speaker has never been able to be overturned on a 67-67 vote.
Representative Stevenson.
And will the leader continue to yield?
He will yield, Representative Stevenson.
Okay, so you think this applies to rogue amendments. Where in this rule, 13.3, it doesn't limit it to any kind of amendment, rogue or otherwise. It doesn't discuss anything about how the amendment comes up. It says that if it's appealed, you need the affirmative vote of each member of one caucus to find the motion or proposition germane. So where in this section do we limit it to certain types of amendment?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Stevenson. Like I said, that was the language that Leader Long used in describing the purpose of this amendment to me.
Representative Stevenson.
Well, I won't continue to ask him to yield, but I think what we have here is a situation where the words don't match what the leader wanted. And I'm sorry, but that's not how the law works. I know Representative Niska knows that. I know that the chamber knows that. What matters is what's on the page, the words. That's how this place works. That's how rules work. That's how law works. And it should matter. It should matter to everyone here that we follow that. And if we set a precedent today that we're just going to break the rules whenever we feel like it, things are not going to go well in the last 3 weeks of session. We are at 67-67. We have to work together to get a budget enacted, which means we have to trust each other. We have to be able to compromise and work together. And we have to hold firm to the agreements that we make with one another. If we don't do that, the whole thing will not work. This is a fundamental breach because the words are so clear. And it's signed by your leadership. If you think that what we did last year was wrong, if you think we broke the rules, then do better than us. Adhere to what you think. I'm serious. If you think it's so important to follow the rules and you think we didn't, if that makes you mad, why aren't you mad about this? Just because someone else does something I don't like doesn't mean that I'm going to go do the same thing that they did that gives me license to go and break some norm or rule that I have. If you think following the rules is important, follow the rules. If you think honoring your agreement is important, honor your agreement.
I'd like to remind the body that we're currently appealing the ruling of the Speaker, and I would recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to correct some misstatements that were made. This body last year, it wasn't the ignoring, it was not allowing the vote. It was ignoring motions, not ignoring an interpretation of a rule. Over the years, many, many years that a few of us have been around, we realized that interpretation of the same words has frequently been different. But except for last year, we were allowed to debate each other. We listened and went back and forth. We didn't ignore a person making a motion. So we can continue this as long as we want, but SOP, practice, and etc. has proven that two members frequently do not agree on the interpretation of words in a statement, a rule, etc. So I believe we should accept the Speaker's ruling and move on, or I'm fine with moving that we work past midnight.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just start by saying we didn't break the rules last year. It's just not that fun when you don't have the votes. We did follow the rules. But even if you think we didn't, I do just want to remind the body of a couple of things. The agreement that we have heard described was signed by all of the leadership. It's signed, it's got words, that say what they say. Our 4 leaders signed it, but we also all voted on it. We voted to adopt these rules. So it doesn't honestly matter to me what one majority or party leader might have said to another party leader in a conversation one time, and whether or not a word was used or in that conversation. That's not how we make rules. It's not how we interpret the rules. We can interpret the words on the page, but we're not doing that. We're actually just interpreting a conversation that none of us were a part of. And conversations that none of us are a part of are not what are on the page. As Representative Hudson said, the person at the desk makes the rules. And if that is true, I mean, she's not there right now, but your speaker did. Sure, that was not intentional, but you know what I mean. Our speaker, the speaker of this chamber, the rightful speaker, the winner of the Game of Thrones, I guess, signed the document. It's signed. We know what it says. It doesn't matter how you want to interpret it, Representative Niska. And I think it's really, or Leader Niska. And I just want to say, I think that this is a particularly fascinating conversation for a legislative body, a body that has many people who have law degrees, many people who understand how law works, and many people who have ambitions. And if you have an ability to not understand that when you sign your name to the words, you agree to those words, I sure hope you don't become our Attorney General.
Any further? I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot of interesting testimony here, a lot of interesting discussion. I found the comment that this was it was stated that this was the purpose of this language was to prevent rogue amendments from being adopted. I wasn't in that discussion, I don't know what was there, but even assuming that's what was said, it seems like a good way to prevent rogue amendments from being adopted would be to adopt language that says that upholding the decision of the Speaker requires the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus to find the motion or proposition germane. And that's what this language actually says here. So it seems like it should be more incumbent upon the parties to the agreement to actually read the language so that they know what it does. And there was no, the vote shows there was no person of both parties who voted for the motion. So I mean, and I just want to verify this. So I'm wondering if Representative Allen would yield to a question.
I don't see Representative Allen here on the floor, so I'm assuming no.
Thank you. Would Representative Altendorf yield to a question?
Representative Freiberg.
She will yield. Is that correct, Mr. Speaker?
Proceed.
Before I proceed, I just need to know whether or not Representative Altendorf will yield to a question.
I am unsure, Representative Freiberg. She will not.
Okay. Will Representative Anderson, PE, yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
She will not.
Will Representative Anderson, PH, yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will not.
Will Representative Backer yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He's not here currently.
Will Representative Bakeberg yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
I think this is becoming dilatory.
Dilatory on whom, Mr. Speaker?
On Representative Freiberg, potentially. Who are you asking to yield now?
I believe I was on Bakeberg. I was on.
You're good on your list? Okay. No, he will not yield.
Okay. Will Representative Baker yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Baker is online, so he will not yield. Okay.
Will Representative Bennett yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
This is great fun. She will not.
I beg your pardon?
She will not yield.
Okay. Let's see. Will Representative Bliss yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will not yield.
Will Representative Burkle yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
Currently not on the floor.
Let's mix it up. Will Representative Zalesnikar yield to a question?
Oh, moving in a different direction. Not here.
Will Representative Whitty yield to a question? Maybe I'll have better luck going in reverse order.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your parliamentary inquiry.
Is there still an agreement that it needs 68 votes to pass any amendment?
I can answer that if you'd like, Mr. Speaker.
Do we not need a majority of the votes to pass any amendment off the floor, Mr. Speaker? My question being, could we not move this to a vote so that we can move on to the important business as opposed to going down the name call list?
I appreciate
if they
the
don't
question.
want to accept the amendment,
Mr.
we
Speaker,
can vote
point
on
of
it.
parliamentary
Thank you.
inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What order of business are we on? What was the purpose of Representative Novotny interrupting Representative
Perfect.
Freiberg?
From my understanding, Representative Novotny was inquiring as to where we are on this discussion regarding the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker, as to whether or not the Speaker's determination was correct, in that when a 67-67 tie occurs, nothing leaves and the situation remains unchanged. Representative Freiberg, you continue to have the floor.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Well, let's try, will Representative Hudson yield to a question? He's usually game to mix things up.
He would love to yield to a...
Awesome, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I knew I could find somebody. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm sorry, Representative Hudson, the language of the amendment says that upholding the ruling of the Speaker requires the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus. So the vote, as you recall, was 67-67. So my question for you is, are you a Democrat?
Representative Hudson, remember, personalities are not allowed in debate. Representative Hudson.
We've learned that we can fluidly identify however we like from day to day, so I suppose for the next 10 minutes I can be.
Representative Freiberg.
Well, I don't really appreciate the tone of that answer. The election certificate says pretty clearly that Representative Hudson is a Republican and that the other 66 members who voted to uphold the ruling of the Speaker are also. My point in doing this was just to get one member. I tried alphabetical order, I tried reverse alphabetical order. I would have gladly gone to you next, Representative Engen, but my point was just to show that there are no members of the Democratic Party who voted to uphold the ruling of the Speaker, and the ruling, the text of the supplemental agreement rule is entirely clear that one member from each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. So I would encourage members to find the point of order well taken to not uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
Further discussion to the appeal of the ruling. Member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's been well discussed at this point. I would simply say that when we're talking about good faith negotiations, it's important that when we have those good faith negotiations that we fairly represent what's happening in those negotiations. It certainly is the case that the Speaker's ruling, as previously, is consistent with the discussion that was had on the agreement, and so I urge members to vote green and uphold the ruling of the Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Is it a point of order, Representative Long?
For further discussion, I'd like to be recognized.
Oh, well, I was going to recognize Representative Hansen, if that's okay with you. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of discussion about what was said behind closed doors. There was no misrepresentation made behind those closed doors. The language was shared directly before a vote that is extremely clear that we all sign. And at this point, the question, as was stated, is not what was discussed before a rule was adopted. The question is, what is the rule that we are applying for this body? There has been no argument from the other side that this rule means anything other than what the plain language means. So, members, we are here to interpret laws and make laws. We are here to interpret rules. This is a very plain rule. It seems like you all have decided that you don't like the rule that you passed, but that is not how we govern here. We have adopted a rule. We should enforce the rule. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Hanson.
Sure,
Jay.
why not? Thank you, Speaker. You know, it's interesting because at one point in time, I was raised by a Republican who told me that they were the party of law and order and freedom. And it's really exciting for me as a Democrat now to see that this is the party that's representing law and order and freedom in society these days. So interesting how things change. You know, a majority is not equal to a tie. And in order to make a majority and to make the rules, you have to win elections. And when you lose elections in both the executive and the legislative branch, the power of the minority is weakened. Always. That's Civics 101. And it's important that we understand how important the rules are, because when we throw those out, it's almost the same as when parties don't stand for what they used to anymore. So Representative Niska said the quiet part out loud for us, that the voters really actually hate the most. That the deals made in smoky rooms can, do, and will disrupt the government that they trust. That intentional misrepresentation will be called the truth, and there'll be people who expect the public to buy that. So I hope that we remember our job is to serve the people with integrity and to have rules and to understand that when you are in a tie, that is not the same as a majority. It is not the same as winning elections that give you the privilege to make those rules, because that's what the voters wanted. We have and always will stand by the side of the voters who expect us to be more honest than their fears of what hides in those smoky rooms and the misrepresentations of people who don't get it right before they leave the room and don't make sure they understand it. We have a signed document before us, and if that doesn't hold water, I am afraid that nothing in this body will. We have hundreds of years of precedence of honoring the rules. And we cannot let today's politics continue to make us do things like ignore the most basic tenets of what this entire body has been built on. So do better and make sure we uphold the rules and the agreement that we all voted on and our leaders signed.
Any further discussion? I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oops, just lost it. Give me a moment. So there's been a lot said, and smoky rooms and whatever. What I would ask us all to do here is just take a step back and do just read the words. I'm not a lawyer, you know, emotions get high here, but the words in this are just so clear. And if we go against that, I just don't understand. I'm going to read it again. If a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21, and the question is put to the body, which it was done, or if a decision of the presiding officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or proposition germane. Please, folks, that is really clear. We can, and you know what? That rule will benefit us all going forward. Can we please just read the words on the paper and overturn the ruling of the Speaker? Thank you.
Any further discussion? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not here in 2023. I came into this legislative session halfway through and very excited to work in a bipartisan manner with you all. And I have seen displays of that bipartisanship in committee, on this House floor, and I am excited to continue it. I fear that if we effectively throw out this rule that was agreed upon by all of our leadership and signed to in the plain language, that this is how bipartisanship dies. And if that is what happens, let it not be said that it was the Democrats who killed bipartisanship. Thank you, Speaker.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Niska yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I am wondering, and I heard Representative Kraft read it, the 13.3. I'm wondering, before you signed this, Representative Niska, did you read the agreement?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Greenman, yes, I did.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because I was going to give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe you didn't read it, and right now you're trying to figure out, like lawyers do, and I will say, when Representative Gomez throws shade at lawyers, she means us too. So get it, but I'm about to bring up some things we talked about in law school. I know that as a lawyer who's done contracts, that sometimes when you sign an agreement, maybe you don't read it well enough. Then you have buyer's remorse and you try to come up with lots of things outside the contract that are not in the agreement, that are not pointed to in the agreement. And what a judge will say is that's extraneous to the agreement, doesn't apply. I also know that this is probably the second time in my career in the legislature that I'm going to bring up former Justice Scalia, but he had a strong penchant to talking about the plain language of the Constitution, the plain language of law, the plain language. In this case, what we're talking about is a contract that we all voted on. And when you read the plain language of this, which I think I will read again, if a question of germaneness is raised under House Rule 3.21 and the question is put to the body, or if the decision of the presiding officer under House Rule 3.21 is appealed, the affirmative vote of at least one member of each caucus is required to find the motion or the proposition germane. That's just the plain language. There's no actually ambiguity, and you and nobody in your caucus has made an argument that there is ambiguity to open up all sorts of other doctrines of interpretation. So what we're hearing right now is that, we're not going to bring up conversations about hearsay, all the conversations that leaders may or may not have had. The reality is there's 134 of us. 130 of us weren't in that room, but 134 of us voted on this language. Presumably we all read it. We didn't have this conversation when we passed it, and now you don't like the result. And so you're using the fact that one of the things you got in negotiation was the speaker to just ignore it. Not only is that not how laws work, that's not how the Constitution works, that's not how rules work. Representative Niska, you're a lawyer, and I haven't even heard a good argument of why your side is right. So I think we're all sort of at a loss here. And I don't know what we do next. Like, if we can't trust the things we all voted on, and maybe I'll ask Representative Niska, do you know what the vote count on this, when we voted on this was?
Are you asking him to yield?
Thank you.
Representative Niska. I believe the question was asked, but to Representative Greenman, you can ask it again, please.
Thank you, and thank you for ask to yield. Representative Niska, do you know what the vote was when we voted on these rules?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Greenman, I don't believe there were any votes against it.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 4 leaders who were in a meeting that maybe you thought that this was not the right interpretation, they all voted for it. So presumably this captured, if you read it, it captured what the summary of the agreement was. There are no codicils or any other the legal terms that I remember from contracts that ride along with it that say or add any other interpretation. 134 members of the body voted for this language that we're all reading. And like the public, we only have what the words are because the public isn't, when we pass a law, the public doesn't get to see all of these other agreements, or maybe why I should interpret the law a different way and not follow the speed limit or whatever it is. So I guess I'd say, I am still talking because I don't actually know what to do with this. You read this, we voted on it. 134 members voted yes. This language is plain as day. We don't even need rules of interpretation. And your strategy is just to ignore it and have the Speaker Pro Tem ignore us. So that's crazy. That's my advice.
Any further discussion? The representative from Washington, Representative DePel.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to remind the body that I did not vote for these rules, nor did another representative. I also want to remind the body that half of the membership didn't show up for 3.5 weeks, and that the Constitution clearly states that the Sergeant at Arms should compel members to return to the chamber so there can be a quorum. So if we want to talk about plain language, we're talking about the Constitution, we're talking about Justice Scalia. The clear language within the Constitution stated that members should have been compelled for a quorum. That is the clear language. This is something that is known to the entire body. Likewise, it's in our Constitution, so it is completely germane to the conversation.
Further discussion. I recognize, again, the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to ask Representative DePel to yield because I thought it was helpful. I thought that it was 134-0. I appreciate the correction and should have asked for the raise. I'm actually wanted to ask Representative DePel to yield for a quick question.
He will yield. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative DePel. Can you tell us why, or if this provision was one of your considerations when you read it? Let me ask it in a different way.
Representative DePel.
Can you please restate the question?
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me ask a different question. As I look at this agreement, we heard near uniform consensus. We heard Representative Niska say that there was sort of rogue agreements. As we talk about it, and the rogue agreements that were not in this, was that part of, as you're thinking about it?
Representative DePel.
Thank you, Speaker. And again, I would like to state that the clear language in the Constitution was that the Sergeant at Arms was to compel members to return to the floor so we could have a quorum. Had we had a quorum, we could have gotten to the business of the legislature a lot sooner. Likewise, we could have been a lot further along with what we're doing here. And so if we're going to talk about clear language, we're going to talk about votes. I voted in favor of what the Constitution stated very, very clearly. And likewise, the Constitution states that the legislature has the ability to remove pay from members. So if I don't show up to my job for 3.5 weeks, should I be paid for that time? And clearly, the Constitution states the legislature has the ability to withhold that also. So you all did not show up to work for 3.5 weeks. While we did, I likewise showed up at my business. I have employees, they show up, they get paid, and then you all required your pay. So if you want to talk about the plain language of the Constitution, which is something that I intend to uphold and support, that is the plain language.
Any further discussion to the appeal of the ruling of the Speaker? I recognize Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Leader Niska would yield to a question.
Will you yield, Representative Niska? He will yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm curious, Representative Niska, you referenced there was conversations with Leader Long about rogue amendments and this applying to a set of amendments, but not all amendments. Is that accurate?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. I think I described that accurately earlier, those conversations.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Niska, then why doesn't the language reflect that?
Are you asking him to yield,
Yes, I'm
Representative
asking him
Howard?
to yield.
He will yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And
Representative Howard, to your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, my question is, if that's the case, why doesn't the language reflect that?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. That might be a good question for Leader Long. The language is what the language says, but that was the description or the conversation that we had around the purpose for the language.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask Representative Niska to continue to yield.
He will continue to yield. Representative Howard.
I believe Representative Griebman asked the question if you had read the language, and you said you had, and then you did sign the language. So I guess the question is, if the tenor, after you read the language, did you ask Representative Long to change this language in any way? Once you read it, presumably, based on the conversations you had, you were comfortable with this language, you signed it. Did you suggest any modifications, use any different words? Curious.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Howard. We did discuss a number of the different provisions in the agreement and different potential ways to word it. I think that this one is not terribly artfully written.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, clearly, what the context of a conversation that two members were privy to and we weren't aside, if Leader Niska thought that there was a different meaning, had every opportunity to suggest or amend the language to reflect that, but it doesn't. But Representative Niska's, basically what I'd say is incompetence isn't a reason for breaking our laws, breaking our rules. And the language is crystal clear. Representative Niska had every opportunity, every member had every opportunity to make an amendment to this language. And just because you didn't, doesn't give you a right to trample our rules.
Further discussion to the appeal. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead, Dave.
Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the tie vote leaves the situation unchanged and the Speaker's ruling prevails. We are on the Reimer amendment. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Just to reiterate, this is really a communication amendment. This is about making sure that we're in compliance, that we're in communication with law enforcement partners across the country to address the problem of specifically illegal immigrants who commit violent offenses or suspected of committing violent offenses. I again ask for your green vote, and I will be requesting a roll call on this bill.
A roll call has been requested. There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I have a few thoughts on this amendment. With respect to the election results, Representative Reimer said that a lot of people had on their mind the issue of undocumented immigrants and illegal immigration. So it's really strange to me that the current administration is focusing on legal immigrants, focusing on students who are here legally, focusing on people who went through the entire legal process and are here legally, and targeting them for removal. So I don't think that is what people voted for. I also find it strange that, according to the data from ICE, that an increasing percentage of immigrants who are in ICE custody and who are being targeted for removal do not have a criminal record. And so that also does not seem to jive with what the election was apparently about. And I think none of us had in mind when we voted in November that we would be sending people to El Salvador and gulags without any due process. So I think that also is not a reflection of the election results. And turning to the substance of this amendment is not going to achieve public safety goals. I would like to quote a couple of sources, law enforcement experts across the country. The International Association of the Chiefs of Police stated, quote, "State and local law enforcement should not be involved in the enforcement of civil immigration laws, since such involvement would likely have a chilling effect on both legal and illegal aliens reporting criminal activity or assisting police in criminal investigations." The Major Cities Chiefs Association, which represents the 68 largest law enforcement agencies in the United States, concluded that commingling the work of local police with federal immigration enforcement efforts, quote, would result in increased crime against immigrants and in the broader community, create a class of silent victims, and eliminate the potential for assistance from immigrants in solving crimes or preventing future terroristic acts. So I would refute the assertion that this language will protect public safety and protect our communities. I also really find it problematic that we are really undermining local control, and I think that Representative Reimer would agree that his community and other communities across the state have very different law enforcement priorities and communities, and that we need to ensure that our local law enforcement has the flexibility to really look at what their communities need and what their specific law enforcement challenges are. So I don't think that a one-size-fits-all is the right approach here. And then I did have some technical questions. So I know that Representative Reimer said that this is about illegal immigrants. And on thanks. On the third page at line 3.17, there's a definition there of undocumented person. Actually, that is not, is that the definition? Where is the definition? Forgive me. It's line, I thought it was, line 4.3, forgive me. Okay, line 4.3. An undocumented person is someone who resides in the United States without approval or acquiescence of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's the definition of undocumented person in this bill. And so would Representative Reimer yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Feist.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. So Representative Reimer, if somebody goes to a consulate, say in London, and they apply for a visa from the US Department of State, and then they show up at the border and they are granted entry by the Customs and Border Protection Officer, and they enter the United States, and that CBP officer gives them 6 months inside the United States. Are they an undocumented person?
Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative. They would be considered an undocumented person. I appreciate the question, which already came up in committee. This person would be under acquiescence, which we've talked about before, and this bill would not impact it.
Representative Feist.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks you for that response. So that person would be here under the acquiescence of the Department of State and the Customs and Border Protection, but not the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So that person who is legally present, who came here to go to Disney World or go to a conference, they would be an undocumented person under this bill. Would you, Representative Reimer, yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Feist.
Well, thank you. Representative Reimer, would someone who has collaborated with local law enforcement, say they were a witness to a crime, and they worked with the local police to help identify the perpetrator, and as part of that process, they received a certification from that local police department saying that they had collaborated and successfully helped to identify and put that perpetrator behind bars. And they received a bona fide determination from the Immigration Service. Would they be an undocumented person?
Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative. So in terms of the undocumented person, I want to make clear again what this bill does. It says that local government and law enforcement will not prohibit federal immigration authorities from carrying out what they deem to be a priority in terms of an illegal immigrant in the community. And then also what this does is it says that any undocumented immigrant who is suspected of committing a violent crime, law enforcement is required to report them to federal immigration authority. In that case, I would say, no, that's not a person who has committed a violent offense, and that's the answer to the question.
Representative Feist.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a lot more examples that I won't bother and bore you all with, although the immigration law professor in me really wants to. But there are just a lot of examples of people who are here legally present who would be considered undocumented under this bill. And I think it really highlights the challenge of trying to incorporate complex federal immigration law into state-level legislation. And so, for all of the reasons that I stated, that I do not think that this bill achieves its goals, and I don't think that the definitions are logical or are going to achieve, they don't define the people as you intend. I do not think that we should adopt this amendment. And I do just want to also state that this legislation really implies and conflates immigrants with criminals. And we know that immigrants commit crimes at much lower rates. And I just really want to emphasize that we should not be implying that all immigrants who are here are somehow a threat to public safety. And for these reasons, I would encourage the body to vote no. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Perez-Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to kind of amplify, just reiterate what my great colleague, Representative Feist, who I work in my first legislative session, my first term with, when we on this floor and in this chamber, and even beyond hearing the cries and echoes of celebration when we passed driver's licenses for all from our communities, not only in my district, but everyone's district. And share a little bit of words of what has happened just a couple of hours ago in conversation earlier today. I finished a virtual meeting with leadership, directors of Academia Cesar Chavez schools and police chief of my city of St. Paul and our St. Paul deputy mayor, because information was received that ICE made a welfare check to a family on behalf of Academia Cesar Chavez school, and that the school reported them for attendance for that welfare check. The directors and educators stated that that is completely a false accusation. It was informed that I showed up yesterday in the afternoon to the home of those families, to the home of those students. The family stated that I said that yes, ICE continued to state that Academia School had requested a welfare check. They stated that Academia reported them for extremely days of missing school, and it is not true. The school did not report the family to the police or requested a welfare check. As chair of the St. Paul delegation, a sanctuary city, which holds a history of welcoming immigrants, in my district, St. Paul experienced significant immigration from Europe, particularly from Norway, Sweden, Ireland, and Germany in the 19th century. Many of this body on both sides who are descendants from. These early immigrants often settled in the specific neighborhoods as the Swede Hollow on the east side and the conversations that we talk about, specifically with members of the legacy board, such as our colleague who passed a great legacy bill today, Representative McDonald, when we talk about the impact of Irish descendants in the city of St. Paul. And I hold those conversations with our chief clerk a lot because I'm a historian fanatic. Now let's move forward into the mid-20s here. St. Paul continuing to attract immigrants from various parts of the world, including our wonderful Southeast Asian, Hmong, Lao, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Latin Americans, Latinos, which we celebrated our day yesterday outside this chamber. Some of those countries being represented by refugees who I have the honor to support, create law with, for the great state of Minnesota, for all Minnesotans who are documented or not, who bring to our state and contribute to. We are a community of descendants of immigrants, and as somebody who's first generation born in Minnesota, to parents who were born as first generation Latinos in New York, to parents of those, my grandparents, who became citizens due to the 1917 Jones Act that was federally made so that Puerto Ricans could be drafted to war, and have been one of the highest military recruitments. We talk about these laws that are structured to impact this country, and this law that's being brought as an amendment, the impact, when we talk about public safety, we're talking about children right now fearing their safety, children that are citizens, children like my daughter who has friends whose parents have been working for 2 decades, back to back in court homes, who are not criminals, just so that they can be proud to have an American flag right next to their Mexican flag or their Ecuadorian flag. I spoke with my chief of police a couple of hours ago, because we hold pride in being a sanctuary city, and we also hold pride in making sure that people feel safe. I hope that this chamber works hard together to ensure that criminals are not allowed to get away with their crimes. But I also hope that this chamber, in a tied house, recognizes that this isn't the way to label folks who want opportunity, folks like your ancestors who came to this country for opportunities to be forgotten about. Freedom and liberty and justice for all. This right here, Representative Reimer, this isn't freedom. This isn't justice to the immigration status. It says we have an immigration problem that we got to fix. This isn't the way to fix it. This is a way of enlisting fear in our schools and our educators who come from all different backgrounds with citizenship because they were born here or they came here and they went through that naturalization project. And I've seen and witnessed, because I love to go when I'm at the River Center or at the Landmark Center, these historic federal places that are the first federal courtrooms, giving folks their American flag to hold, that have worked hard while fearing the realities. The numbers are there. Representative Feist, you said it's listed that there are more criminals that are documented. So if you think that this law right here brings justice to the state of Minnesota, regardless of your side or this side, I look at it as an entire side, as a state of indigenous land that has been welcoming through the most horrific stories that are not stories, it's documentation. So let's flip the definition of what documentation is. Let's talk about how our immigrant community is providing opportunities and workforce for revenue so that when I sit in capital investment and I see this water that looks like tar, whether it's in your district or trying to fight so that we can keep these PFAs out of my water in this district, that brings money and revenue to the infrastructure so that bridges aren't falling. And so that kids have dignity and hold those stories for their parents working hard at night to get safe home and not pulled over. because we're getting stereotyped. There are citizens that are teachers that were born, whether it be in Texas, Wisconsin, or Minnesota right now, from these schools that I just had conversations with, that are educators, born citizens, Mexican Americans that are being pulled over on White Bear Avenue in the districts of my colleagues that I chair the delegation of our St. Paul here at the state, who are getting profiled. They're not getting profiled because maybe their tabs are expired or they're speeding. They're not breaking the law. They're trying to get to work, and they're getting pulled over by ICE, saying that, where's your citizenship? These are the conversations that we've held, and they're happening even more since January of 2025. That's a shame. That's a shame that folks have to go to work and feel the fear of just wanting to get there to teach students, teach all of our Minnesota students. Our law enforcement in St. Paul, I can speak about in St. Paul because I hold conversations with our St. Paul Police Department. I can contact my chief and say, hey, we need to talk about what's happening here. And there's information that they can't share and they can share. And I hold that with respect. But what they can share is who's breaking the law and who's not. And when I see the impact that these kids are getting separated from their families, that these kids are scared to go to school, and we have walls to work on even in education when it looks and defines who's in attendance and who's not, because kids are getting scared to go to school and they're citizens. And their parents may not be, and their parents are voluntarily leaving, and they don't want to leave their kid behind, so those kids have to leave to a horrible situation that their parents dreamt for them not to have to, just like your descendants dreamt. Maybe they landed in Ellis Island and crossed over here to the Ellis Island of Harriet Island that's here in what's claimed to be the Ellis Island of Minnesota in the 19th century. I love history. You know why? Because I get to learn about everyone's side of maybe their privileges that they have and the privileges that they don't have. But the privilege that I have, that many of my constituents who tell me about their stories of when they became citizens, the privilege is that I didn't have to live in that fear of them trying to figure out if they were going to make it home at night. I didn't have to live the fear of what Misael Lopez, who came to this country at 3 years old and was deported at 20 years old, the same age as us, and he didn't know what the home of Mexico was. He knew what the home of what St. Paul was. But he followed the law, and when it was time to go, he went because he wasn't going to escape or run away. But he said these words that it felt like I was being tackled. It felt like I was being watched and followed and fearful. So I will leave. But that's this law right here. It's saying, let's catch, let's stereotype, let's profile. This is why I cannot support this. Representative Reimer, I would love to have conversations about how we can make our immigration system better. But this law right here in this amendment, absolutely. Go back to the drawing board. No furthermore.
Further discussion to the amendment. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Engen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Reimer. This is a good bill, and we've heard time and time again in committee and on the floor, one of the main talking points you guys have had has been regarding federal cuts and how that's a big issue that the state is facing. And I put air quotes around that because it hasn't happened. But it will, dependent upon your vote on this. Because on February 29th of this year, an executive order was signed that instructs the DOJ and DHS to look into any state or municipal level of government that's receiving federal funding and withhold it from them if they are in non-compliance with this executive order. So for all of that pearl-clutching that we heard, for all of those talking points that we sat through, I would remind the body that you can stop that right now. You can stop that bad thing that you claim is happening from happening. Just vote yes on his bill, on his amendment to this bill. If you don't, I'm sorry, we can't continue to listen to it because it doesn't seem as if you're really that sincere about it. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to say one thing about this, and it's a little bit higher level. And I'm speaking, you know, in my time here, I've had the chance to create some unlikely partnerships across the aisle about some issues that are really, really important to me and that are really important to a lot of you about the Constitution and specifically about personal liberty and about government overreach and about privacy. And there's this complex of issues that we've found some bipartisan agreement on. And I just feel the need in this moment we all are in these seats, and there's something really extraordinary happening in our country right now related to all of our individual liberties and all of our individual freedoms that I think a lot of you hold really dear. And I think that's sincere. I sincerely believe in our rights as human beings, our rights to exist outside of government interference with our privacy. I hold it very dear. The thing about civil rights is that if everybody doesn't have them, none of us have them. If everybody doesn't have the right to due process and habeas corpus in our country, then none of us actually have that right. Without due process, how do you prove that you are not what the government says that you are? People who think like me throughout the history of this country, and people who think like some of you, frankly, throughout the history of this country, have been told or have been described as thinking in a certain way by the government and punished for it. If you do not have the right to due process, there is no way to maintain your liberty from government tyranny. And if those things are dear to you, and I believe that they're truly dear to a lot of you, you have to understand that the way these things begin is by scapegoating and deciding who are the people who we can say are the most expendable. That's our test case for suspending civil rights. That is what's happening in our country right now. So I just had to stand up because, I think that there's a lot of things that are going on in the day-to-day level, but we really have to be paying attention to what's happening. And, if today it's that they're suspending the civil rights of somebody that you disagree with or that you think doesn't have the right to have a right in this country, you should know that tomorrow it could be you, tomorrow it could be somebody who thinks like you. And I think, I didn't pull it up, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. Those who would sacrifice individual liberty for temporary safety deserve neither safety nor liberty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion to the A15 amendment? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Reimer yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Reimer, when we heard this bill in committee, we had approximately 30 letters of opposition. Many of those letters contained signatures from multiple organizations. I will say they were letters of opposition and concern, and there was only one letter in support of your bill. And at the time in committee, you said you had not had the opportunity to read those approximately 30 letters of opposition or concern. Have you now had the opportunity to read those letters, Representative Reimer?
Representative Reimer.
Mr. Speaker and members, so I did read a number of the letters, and it it echoed a lot of the sentiment that we're hearing on the floor today. Representative Paris-Vega brought up that law enforcement knows who these people are who are committing crimes. I want to refocus the purpose of this bill to reiterate that this is about illegal immigrants who are suspected of committing a violent crime. It's a very stringent definition, and like I say, it's a very narrow bill about communication, and a lot of the letters from the nonprofits that came through in that committee sounded a lot like the testimony we're hearing today.
Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I still didn't get a clear answer if you read all of those letters yet, and they're not just from nonprofits. And so for the benefit of you, if you haven't yet read all those letters, or for those who weren't in our committee and didn't know, I would like to talk about some of those letters. The Association of Minnesota Counties and the Minnesota Sheriff's Association raised concerns about your bill, particularly as it relates to due process and equal protection. In addition, the broad reporting requirements increase the risk of civil rights violations and may expose county to lawsuits, with costs having to be covered by property taxes and levies. These legal concerns are more detailed in another letter. Mandatory reporting of arrests, regardless of prosecution decisions, may discourage immigrant communities from reporting crimes or cooperating with law enforcement, ultimately undermining public safety. Next, we have a letter from 6 organizations that provide victim services. They wrote with concerns as well about House File 16 and said that it makes survivors of crime, including domestic and sexual violence, child abuse, and general crime, more vulnerable. Undocumented survivors are frequently afraid of contacting emergency services, including law enforcement, when they are subject to crimes because of the fear of deportation. This fear is often enough to prevent a survivor from accessing critical resources. Abusive partners, employers, and family members further isolate victim survivors of violence by using immigration status to maintain power and control. There's a lot more in that letter that I'm going to, in the sake of time, not continue. The League of Minnesota Cities wrote that your bill unnecessarily interferes with local decision-making. The legislation threatens to compromise good relationships between city officials and immigrant communities. Local law enforcement agencies work cooperatively on a regular basis with immigration while recognizing that immigration enforcement is primarily the federal government's responsibility. Local law enforcement agencies statewide depend upon trust-based relationships within immigrant communities to solve crimes and implement community policing strategies that promote public safety. We have a letter from the County Attorneys Association, again, talking about the potential for civil rights violations under the 5th and 14th Amendments. The ACLU said that the reporting requirements would unduly burden county attorneys who have no expertise on immigration law and do not necessarily monitor all arrests. It would convert them into federal civil law enforcement agencies, but would provide them with no training or definitions of undocumented that aligns with federal law. It diverts scarce resources away from their obligations to ensure public safety and could result in disparate treatment of people based on their race, ethnicity, and national origin. We have a letter signed by a number of the school board, schools, those groups that come to our to the legislature here, and says it gives any school employee legal authority to share students' personally identifiable data. The provision erases essential protections. In fact, school officials would have little to no power to limit indiscriminate data sharing among employees who traditionally would not be allowed access to this protected data. This bill is also part of the Judiciary bill. I know we have folks in here who care a lot about privacy and about data. The public defenders also wrote a letter. Several public defenders did. Again, with constitutional concerns about this. So that's just a sampling of the letters that we received in committee. I also just want to reiterate a couple of points that have been made before. People who are undocumented immigrants, actually, comes from the Cato Institute. It's more conservative leaning. It has been found that they reduce crime rates by committing fewer crimes. More than a dozen studies have found that immigration, including undocumented immigration, is associated with less crime. Undocumented immigrants were half as likely to have committed an offense serious enough for them to be incarcerated in the U.S. in 2023. Cities with large increases in undocumented immigrants between 21 and 24 saw declines in murders, even with limits on ICE cooperation. So what's happening, and with the election that you mentioned, is that there's a lot of rhetoric, and it's based on false information. And actually, what's happening in our nation right now, and what your bill wants to do, makes us less safe. Finally, I just want to conclude by saying that a vote for your amendment is a vote against public safety. It is a vote against civil rights. It is a vote against the Constitution. Please vote no, members.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for the opportunity to present this amendment. When I think about what this amendment means and why it's important, I had a testifier. His name was Charles Thayer, and his mom, America Thayer, was brutally murdered and beheaded by a multiple convicted and awaiting felony conviction Cuban illegal immigrant. And instead of saying, we're going to do the hard work to address his testimony, which was harrowing, and he said at the very end, he doesn't see how this is a partisan issue. Instead of doing the hard work and acknowledging the suffering that he went through and the specific situation that led his mother to that fate that day in Shakopee, we had an attorney testifier come in and say, you know what? It's really hard to deport people back to Cuba. And then I went and did my own research. And in President Trump's first term, we actually deported 1,900 people to Cuba. This bill would have caught that problem early, would have caught that person early, and increased the communication between local law enforcement and the people who are most appropriate to deal with it. I think about that man every day. I think about his mom every day. And that's why this bill is important. Because that crime, which could have been prevented, it happened in Shakopee. It happened in Shakopee, and it could have happened in St. Cloud. It could have happened in Carver County. It could have happened in North Branch, where I live. This bill does make us safer because it increases the communication between all pertinent law enforcement that needs to be involved in situations like that. I ask for your green vote, and I ask you to consider, if you have a red vote, what you will go back to your community and say. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead, Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Scott moves to amend House File Number 2432, the second engrossment as amended. The amendment is coded A13.
There is an amendment to the amendment, but we'll allow the author of the original amendment the opportunity to speak on it. The representative from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And What this amendment does is it appropriates money that's going right now to prisoner phone calls that was increased in the last legislative session. And this allows that money to be spent to hire more corrections officers and increase their pay. Members, I think correction officers' job is the toughest job in the state of Minnesota. They endure a lot. We've done a lot of work to try to get that, that program that was lacking. We were having a real shortage of corrections officers, and so we're getting that back up to where it needs to be, but we need to maintain the officers that we have and have some that are in the wings as well. Members, what we've learned since the change in the phone call situation with prisoners that the DFL implemented 2 years ago is that we used to, the corrections department keeps track of how many minutes are used and how many minutes prior to that bill being passed. There are 350-some thousand minutes annually. Now, monthly, and now that number is over 7 million minutes. And what we're learning is a lot of that, we're hearing from corrections officers, a lot of that is they're not using it necessarily to call family, they're using it for gang activity. They're using it to communicate to the gangs back on the outside. So members, I think I really believe in this. I am going to pull the amendment for now. But I think in this time where we're looking at deficits, we really need to prioritize. And are we going to prioritize prisoners? Are we going to prioritize law-abiding citizens that are taking a lot of flack every day in their jobs? And that's a discussion that we're going to have moving forward. So with that, I withdraw the amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Scott withdraws the A13 amendment. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill a third reading.
Third reading, House File number 2432, as amended.
Third reading. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Sibley, Representative Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the inclusion of House File 130, which establishes a 10-year mandatory minimum for first-degree sex trafficking of a minor child who is under the age of 18. So the current statute provides a maximum of 25 years in prison. However, there is no minimum sentence for first-degree sex trafficking. And this bill would make sure abusers are locked up and that our children are protected. And as a survivor of assault, it is important to hold all of these people accountable for their horrible acts. And then also there was an inclusion of House File 467, and this changes the correctional sunset fees to 2029, and I want to thank Representative Feist for working with me on that language. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank co-chairs Moeller and Novotny for including these two bills. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Feist.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am rising just to raise one concern. I do very much support this bill, and there's a lot of really great provisions in it that I'm really excited about. But I did want to raise one concern as we pass this bill off the House floor and it will go to a conference committee. And that is with respect to the IC Poet funds that go to local law enforcement to assist with recruitment and retention. I noticed recently that 5 counties in Minnesota entered into agreements with ICE to collaborate on local law enforcement enforcement and civil immigration enforcement. And I find that really troubling. One of those 5 counties does have an IC Poet officer. And the IC Poet program is about ensuring that law enforcement is well-staffed, and the need for it. The law enforcement has told us that they are incredibly overworked and understaffed, and we really need to invest in helping them to recruit and retain officers. So it's really confusing to me that one of these counties is now going to spread itself even thinner and to focus on immigration enforcement. In addition, I just wanted to emphasize that local law enforcement really needs to collaborate with immigrant communities, and these type of 287G agreements really undermine that trust with local law enforcement. There are U visas for immigrant victims of serious crimes and T visas for victims of trafficking. And these are really important visas that were created to encourage immigrant victims and witnesses to work with law enforcement. Over the last decade, about 100,000 unauthorized immigrants have obtained legal status through these U visas. And there are about 355,000 requests that have been sent to the federal government by local law enforcement across the country because they know that it is really important that they build trust and collaborate with immigrant communities to protect the broader public safety. We know that ICE has now abandoned its prioritization of focusing on immigrants who have been charged with or convicted of crimes. And the percentage of immigrants who are now in ICE detention, as I mentioned earlier, a larger percentage of those immigrants have no criminal background whatsoever. So we know that federal civil immigration enforcement is not about public safety now, if it ever was. And so I'd like to just end by pointing out the Minnesota Sheriff's Association and the Association of Minnesota Counties. They wrote in their concerns about collaboration between federal immigration enforcement and local law enforcement that they were worried that this, quote, may discourage immigrant communities from reporting crimes or cooperating with law enforcement, ultimately undermining public safety. So as we bring this bill into conference committee, I think we should really look at the IC Poet funds, and we should ensure that those funds are not going to local law enforcement that are collaborating with ICE. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. So first, I want to say thank you very much to Chairs Moeller and Chair Novotny for their work on this public safety bill, on the public safety portion of it. And so I want to make sure that we're lifting up today victim services in this bill. So the bill has $16 million in funding for victim services in a time where victim services is more critical than it's ever been, along with the fact of the federal government is making massive cuts in victim services across the nation. So just this last year, over $100 million was requested from Minnesota nonprofits who advocate for victims, and that money has all gone away. The RFPs are no longer available, and that money is not coming any longer from the federal government. So having this $16 million in this bill is critical. And so I handed out a letter today from Southern Valley Alliance, which is an organization in Shakopee that serves the Southwest Metro, and they have well over $500,000, so $500,000 that is used for directly for housing support for victims of domestic violence. And that money has all gone away, and we do not know how that is going to be replenished. This money, the $16 million in the bill today, is not enough to meet all the needs that we have. And so we need everyone to recognize the importance of this money, the importance of the federal government in what they are doing that is extraordinarily detrimental to all of our local communities. And so we need to make sure that we're lifting up these organizations and talk to the folks that are in your local communities on what this means for them, because we need to make sure that we are continuing to fund these. And so I hope this money stays and grows as we go forward through the conference committee process, and that we're able to get more funding in here for these domestic violence shelters, housing assistance, homelessness, those kinds of things, to make sure that we're going forward. And so this letter from Southern Valley Alliance just outlines exactly where we're at today and why this is so critically important for our future. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to start out by thanking both chairs as well as the entire committee for all the work that they put in. I was happy to see that my language for House File 135 was included in the bill, and this is a bill that helps support officers at our local correction facilities. But I also want to thank Deputy Ness for bringing this forward to me. I don't sit on the Public Safety Committee, so when an officer comes to me and asks for help, I try to do what I can. And this bill is going to strengthen the protections for those that serve, as well as ensure order within our local correction facilities. Our county jailers, deputies, correction officers, they deserve the same level of protection and respect that their counterparts get at a state level. And this provision of the bill does that. It sends a clear message that violence against law enforcement, correction staff, it's not going to be tolerated no matter where it happens. I'm grateful for the work that was done in committee, as well as I want to give a shout out to Representative Pinto for addressing some of the sentencing language of the bill. Thank you for that. And again, just thank both Chair Moeller, Chair Novotny. This is a really good bipartisan bill, and I hope we can light up the board.
I recognize the member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just wanted to say thank you to both Chairs Novotny and Chair Moeller for including House File 897 in this bill. What House File 897 does is aligns the criminal penalty for exposing children and vulnerable adults to fentanyl with current statute for exposing children and vulnerable adults to methamphetamine. This was brought to me from back home by an assistant county attorney that was prosecuting a case involving a 2-year-old little girl that was exposed to fentanyl. As he was trying to prosecute that case, he found that he could only charge them with a gross misdemeanor. That's ridiculous. So I'm surprised that this hasn't been passed sooner. Just last Christmas, there was a 18-month-old that was killed on Christmas Day because of exposure to fentanyl. Protecting those that are the most vulnerable among us should be an utmost priority for every single person in this chamber. So for including this provision in this bill, I am very thankful. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate it. And members and colleagues, we hear time and time again that public safety is one of the most important things in our communities, and it should be. But I think what we have to always remember, and we need to be honest, and we've started to do this work here, is that it's more than just enforcement, it's more than just punishment. And folks have heard me time and time again say accountability has its place, but it's the then what. But I also believe in prevention and intervention. And in 2023, we passed the largest investment we've ever done in the history of this state for intervention and prevention. We put $71 million there for competitive grants. And we said to folks that have been doing this work for decades in this state that we are now going to invest in the work that you've been doing because we know the data tells us that it works. And it has been working. With that $71 million, and I will remind folks that it only goes for 5 years, so we're going to have to make some decisions soon. But what we're going to make decisions about is, and we're going to have to decide is, do we want to keep investing in what is actually working in our state? And it is working. And here are some examples. In Minneapolis, homicides are down 60%. Gunshot victims are down 35%. Carjackings are down 33%. And in Brooklyn Park, and I'm talking about cities because these cities are close to me. And in Brooklyn Park, overall crime is down 6%. Violent crime has dropped 25%. And this is an all-time low since that data has been collected in that city, one of the largest cities in Hennepin County. And law enforcement leaders in both of those cities have said, it's clear the progress is due to community-rooted programs and youth engagement, not just enforcement. So we know that this works. And the reason I point this out This is the important point here. We are seeing instability at the federal level that also funds some of this type of work. And we can talk all we want about how we don't know, it's uncertain, but I can tell you that here's some certainty here. There's also a program at Hennepin County Medical Center called the Next Step Program. It's a hospital-based violence intervention program that has saved lives and broken cycles of trauma. The reason I mention this program is because it recently lost a grant that is funded by the Department of Justice. Just canceled, out of the blue. Got the call from the state saying this grant has been canceled. No reason for it. Now, what that means is that the work that this organization has been doing, which has shown that the program has reduced re-injury rates by 5% when they're doing the work that they do. That means this work could go away because that type of funding is unstable at the federal level. I know some folks here don't want to talk about that, but that is the reality that we are facing, and that is the reality that we have to face when we're determining what we're going to put in our budgets and how we focus on keeping our communities safe. And so I've got two things to discuss here because we've got two bills up. The last piece I want to add, that's my piece on community safety and the importance of violence intervention and why we need to ensure that we continue to fund it. It's working. We need to continue to doing that. That's why I'm going to vote green on this bill. But I want to end with this. We're at a crossroads here when we talk about our democracy. We are. And the reason is because at the foundation of our democracy is the rule of law. Now, the judiciary bill that we're going to pass here, led by co-chairs Liebling and Scott, it may not be perfect, but it does what it needs to do in this moment, in this time, in our state and in our country. Very polarized, we're very divided, but what we have always been able to fall back on in this country and in our states is the rule of law. That is what makes our democracies go. That is what keeps our democracies grounded, and that is what allows people to still believe in the institutions that make our democracies go. And the reason I raise this, because part of our job is to ensure that we make sure our democracies stay intact. So the reasons I raise this about the rule of law and the importance that we maintain and continue to maintain independent judiciaries, because the moment that goes, we have nothing but chaos. And our job is to maintain the rule of law and not to buy into, and not to lean into, and not to facilitate chaos in our state or our country. And right now, we are absolutely at a crossroads. We've got executives saying, and we've got elected officials agreeing with, that they could ignore court orders, not just from district courts, but from the Supreme Court. That is what we're facing right now. And I don't think that's a partisan issue. I think that is an American issue. And if we lean into that, it is very un-American, very un-American. That is what we have to ensure that we walk away from, that we run away from, that we ensure, again, that we don't lean into chaos, that we ensure that we have the rule of law. So now it's up to us. And I'm voting green on these bills because I believe these bills do that. They will maintain an independent judiciary, let them do their work, and maintain the rule of law. And we are saying, and I think we all agree on this, I believe we all agree on this, on both sides of the aisle. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in protecting that. We believe that it should not matter what your socioeconomic status is, what your race is, how powerful you are, what your political ideology is. That should not matter in regards to how you are treated in our justice system. And a vote green on this will say that you support that and you believe in the rule of law and you believe in democracy. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I want to talk about Article 6 that's in this bill. And Article 6 has to do with the Crime Fraud Prevention Bureau that was housed in the Minnesota Department of Commerce. And a little bit about the importance of that. And I know many of you have spent a lot of time on the floor today doing things and other things, and maybe are also engaging in other activities and maybe not fully embracing the comments that are made by other members on the floor today. But I would ask you to listen to this that I'm going to be sharing with you. In the Minnesota Department of Commerce is housed the insurance industry as the chief regulator. And as a part of that regulatory authority, they go after the bad people who commit insurance fraud. And the reason I say that this is important to everybody that's in here is one of the things we're hearing a lot about from our members in this chamber and from our constituents is the rising cost of insurance, exponentially increasing. And the purpose of the Fraud Bureau that is funded by the insurance companies here in the state of Minnesota, they worked with the Department of Commerce, worked with the legislature to actually pay money to hire investigators that employed in that division, sworn police officers who have the ability to arrest the bad doers on insurance-related fraud. And this division has worked marvelously well in the Minnesota Department of Commerce, the state regulator of insurance. As a matter of fact, it was working so well and things were happening very satisfactorily. The department came back to the legislature and said, would you be willing to expand the number of investigators and the breadth and scope of the individuals that have authority to act in this behalf? And asked the industry if they would pony up and pay again, and the industry said, yes, we will do that. Then that fateful day of January 3rd, 2025 came. I got a phone call from the Commissioner of Commerce, and the Commissioner said, Representative O'Driscoll, I want to let you know before it goes public that the governor has issued an executive order to take the Crime Fraud Bureau out of the Department of Commerce and locate it over at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And I said, oh, how can I help you? And she said, well, the governor wants to do it, and so it's going to happen by executive order. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me explain to you what just happened by that executive order. What happened was the chief regulator in this state no longer has an investigation and prosecutory division. It now rests over at another agency here in the state of Minnesota, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And in my conversations with the Bureau's staff, I asked the question after question after question, and the people that I was visiting with said, well, maybe we need a law. Maybe we need some statutory language. Maybe we need legislation. And I said, hey, how about the whole concept of needing legislation if we're going to be moving this division out of commerce and housing it over in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension? You are literally giving a leg up to the bad actors, in my opinion, because you're taking away the people who will have this reported to them, the Department of Commerce, and they must then make a referral now to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and they will prioritize that with other work and put it in front of the Crime Fraud Bureau. And the other part that's really interesting about this is those increases that this body agreed to have yet to be filled. And I find it very odd that on January 3rd of this year, we get an executive order to move this whole division after the Commerce Committee and the legislature have done the hard lifting of making funding decisions to expand the number of persons that are in this division, to help you, to help me, to help everybody in the state of Minnesota who has insurance and insurance fraud questions. By everyone's measure, they get an A+ for the work that they were doing. I had as the co-chair of the Commerce Committee, I had approximately 3 hours worth of hearings on why we were moving this. We spent almost 1 full day on a bill that I had to require the Commerce Fraud Bureau to be in the Department of Commerce, to take care of you, me, and our constituents. I have nothing against the bill outside of that provision, But I thought it would be good that everybody in the legislature today, and anybody who's watching, to know what's happening with your tax dollars and with private investment dollars from the industry to help protect you, me, and everyone else who buys and is involved in insurance in the state of Minnesota. And it's interesting that we're having to have this conversation where government was actually working, people are actually being able to get results, but now we're moving that to another division. Under the umbrella that, well, they do this kind of stuff in investigations anyhow, why don't we just roll it all together? No, that doesn't pass the test with me. So I wanted to take the opportunity today just to share that with all of you, that I've been fighting on your behalf to keep the Fraud Bureau on insurance in with the regulator in the Department of Commerce, because that is where it belongs, in my opinion. And I have served on the Commerce Committee and have had exposure in the insurance and other regulated industries all of my professional life. And I just thought on a Friday afternoon, when we're talking about the public safety bill, that you might want to know the rest of the story. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So when I stand up, you know that we're almost done with this bill. So there's a lot that's been said already, and I'm just going to speak really briefly. And I just want to add one thing to what my wonderful Vice Chair, Representative Frazier, had to say about the rule of law, and I so appreciate his remarks. One of the things, of course, that's going on right now in our country is that when judges make rulings, sometimes people that don't like those rulings attack the judge, and attack sometimes in ways that actually put the judges in danger. And this is a very dangerous trend in our society, and it's happened to people of all different opinions. And one thing we have to do as Americans, and certainly as elected officials, is stand up for the rule of law by standing up for our judges, whether we agree with their rulings or not. Not calling for their impeachments, not calling for something to happen to them, God forbid, but standing up for the idea that we have courts and that there are ways to appeal and that sometimes we have to live with rulings we don't like. And this bill actually does something, a little step, to help with that, which I'm very grateful to Representative Curran for, that they worked on this provision. Another little step in protecting our judges personally, because judging has become a very dangerous profession, and that is so wrong. And we should all be against that, and I believe we are, and I think, again, I so appreciate Chair Scott, because I know she appreciates this very much, that we have to defend our judiciary. That is our job as the legislative branch, to defend the rule of law, and that means defending the fact that we have three branches of government and they are independent of each other. And so in this bill is this very important provision that helps to protect the private information of judges, to give them just a little bit of extra security, and that is a really great thing. So it's really important, those checks and balances that we have, and I heard Representative O'Driscoll somewhat starting out talking about executive orders that he didn't like. And yeah, executive orders can get out of hand. They certainly can. Because one thing that we do know is that power does really corrupt, and absolute power really does corrupt, absolutely, as the old saying goes. And so we need those checks and balances. And we may disagree about where the lines are, but I hope we can all agree that we need those balances. So I'm just going to stop there, members. Thank you all for the good discussion. We have a really good bill here, and I hope you'll all vote for it.
I recognize the member from Scott. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Liebling, I'm glad you brought up the judicial thing, because I had written it on my notes and forgot to mention it. Thank you, Representative Curran, for all the work that you did on that bill, because I know it was difficult to please everyone, shall we say. And at the end of the day, the bill's a good one. It's practical for the county recorders and stuff. What they're going to be doing is just removing the public record of a judge's residence, so that is not so easily found by folks that may want to harm them. So members, I think we do have a good balanced bill here, and I hope that you will support it.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Moeller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I started with thanking staff, and I did forget to mention the revisor's office as well. They really helped us a lot on many of the bills that we heard in committee and that are included in this bill. I also started by talking about the importance of funding victim services. And in the meantime, you have all received a letter at your desk signed by the organizations that represent those different organizations that provide victim services, and you'll see signatures in that letter of folks from all over the state. We've got a tribal nation, law enforcement, county attorneys, social workers, folks in the business community, medical providers, pastors, and more, because everybody recognizes how important it is that we are providing these life-saving services to victims and survivors of crime. So I just encourage you to look through that. I'm sure you'll recognize people in your community. Please talk to the advocacy programs and the direct service programs in your communities and find out what's happening. And I think a strong vote on this bill will send a good message to the Senate as we continue negotiating just how very important it is that we fund this and the other things that are in our bill. And for that reason, I hope members can vote yes. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, the author of the bill, Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much has been said. This is a good bill. This will help. This will make a difference in Minnesota. I want to personally thank the staff that I worked with, especially John Holquist. Some people have a subscription for the advanced AI programs that you can get. I don't need that. I have John Holquist. If I wonder what I said in a meeting 2 minutes ago or 4 years ago on a committee, John will have notes that he's taken, and he, most importantly and amazingly, knows where to find those notes. So that's incredible. Isaac Pillen came on mid-session to replace J.R. Swanson, who was called away for active duty military. J.R., if you're watching, hope you're wearing your sunscreen because he's probably pretty warm right now. Isaac, thank you for catching on as fast as you did. And to my CLA, Mary McNamara, I've been here 5 years. Mary is the only LA I've ever had. I don't know how she puts up with me, but I appreciate it. And she became like the den mother for our public safety group this year. The nonpartisan staff, John Walls, Jeff Diebel, and Ben Johnson, thank you for the patience with me having to explain things sometimes, several times, and we'll move on from there. This is a good bill. It theoretically spends some money, but it just covers a lot of money that we were spending that wasn't in the base. There continues to be a pretty big gap that the state is going to have to make up somehow. Don't know how we're going to do that. Most of those costs are built-in things like salaries for corrections. I appreciate your green bill, and I will sit down.
The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Baker.
Go ahead,
Baker votes aye.
Baker votes aye. Swazinski.
Swazinski votes aye.
Swazinski votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 128 ayes, 4 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title is agreed to.